Welcome all. This is wonderful. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. As we know, Zoom fatigue is real. So we, and I know Sacha as well, really appreciates you taking your lunch hour to hear about his really important research. As we mentioned earlier in the week during the colloque, Sacha, our Ostrom Fellow, one of really, I think, an all-star cast of fellows this year, this time from geography, is going to be speaking to us about his really interesting paper and work more broadly on the role of monitoring and law enforcement on deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. This was just fascinating. So I really enjoyed it, Sacha, and I'm thankful that we have the opportunity to highlight your research today. So without further ado, over to you. And per usual, everybody, I'll help do my best to moderate. So feel free to use the chat feature or raise hand when we get to that point. So thanks so much, Sacha.
Thank you, Scott, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm gonna start to share my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Perfect.
Okay. So the title of my today's presentation is the role of monitoring and law enforcement on deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. It is one of the chapters of my PhD dissertation, and it's a work in progress. So all the comments are very welcome. To frame my problem, I like first to
Hey, Sacha, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
highlight the importance.
We're getting just a little bit of feedback on your mic here and there. So I don't know if there's an easy way to fix that because it's just intermittent. But if you had another mic or another way to connect just the audio, you might try it. Maybe it's the headphones. I'm not sure. We can still understand pretty much everything you're saying. I just wanted to flag it in case there was an easy fix. Sorry about that. I know when you're midstream, it's no fun. Well, now that's not working at all. So maybe we should go back to the way we had it. The joys of Zoom, right?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. No, that works.
Okay. It's better now?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds better. It's not as distorted.
So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. So as the world recognizes the importance of keep forests standing and seeks to slow the pace of climate change, preserve wildlife, and support the livelihood of billions of people, reducing deforestation is a major part of that solution. And to deal with this challenge, a wide variety of policy designs are in place, and the literature have extensively evaluated those problems from different perspectives, especially in the Amazon. So for example, just one of the examples is the creation of protected areas or market-based solutions, payment for conservation, creating strict laws to regulate the land use. But a common factor among all of these policies is that they are creating rules to govern the land, but these rules must be enforced somehow. And in the Amazon, the environmental agency responsible for law enforcement is IBAMA, and that's the story that I'm going to talk about today. The objective of my paper is to explore whether and how the enforcement of formal legal rules was effective to limit deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. And for reaching this goal, first I tried to describe the major action situations that shaped land use governance in the Amazon using the combination of the Ostrom IAD and SES framework as proposed by Daniel Cole. And then I report preliminary econometric analysis on the role played by enforcement to reduce deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon using a grid year panel data and instrumental variables approach. So first, the institutional analysis. I'd like to start with this figure, which there's a lot going on here, but I'd like to explain the setup of this analysis. First, I get as a breakpoint in time 2004, when several changes in the policy happened, and there were pre-existing conditions that I will unpack in the following slides. And there are three action situations, two in the collective choice level and one in the operational level that I try to describe, and several outcomes that we can observe using the rates of deforestation. So the Brazilian Amazon extends over an area of 4.2 million of square kilometers. It's equivalent to 43% of USA, so it's a huge area. And it represents 40% of the tropical forests on Earth. But thinking this territory as a pristine and unpopulated place is a huge mistake. There are a lot of people living there, and more precisely 24 million of people living in the Brazilian Amazon, in the legal Amazon, equivalent to more than 2 times the population of New York City. And this population is mostly urban population, about 72% living in urban areas. The economic activities that take place in this region have already caused a lot of deforestation. So far, an area of 430,000 of square kilometers have been deforested in several commodities frontiers across this territory, equivalent to the area of California. And the major drivers of this deforestation are cattle ranching and soybean plantations. Here is a graph showing deforestation rates over time in the Brazilian Amazon since 1988 to 2020. And the deforestation slowdown that we observe after 2004 is considered a success case by policy scientists. And until 2004, the deforestation rates were way higher than we observe today. And in the 70s when the large-scale deforestation started. Less than 1% was cleared by 1975. And the government started a plan to occupy and mistakenly considered empty and unproductive territory. The huge rates of deforestation called the attention of the whole board, particularly because of land conflict and the climate change issue. The government started creating strict forest laws and policies to rule the land use in the region, but the rules in form were not actual working rules. So just an example of how strict the rules were. Before 1996, 50% of the area of a property could be used for production, and the other 50 should be preserved as forests. And it changed in 1996 for 80% of forests. So a small share of the land you can use even in private properties. And in 2004, Brazilian government enacted a plan to control deforestation. And what we observe after that is that deforestation decreased by 83%, and it was remained stable for some time. But then, with political instability and the new government, the rates increased again. And so this satellite monitoring system, it's important to understand that deforestation is a process that doesn't happen from one day to the other. So the primary forest standing over time, the first process in general is logging, then the clearing of the land using fire and other resources. The first satellite system that Brazilian relied on since 1988 was PRODIS, and it was used to measure deforestation annually. So there was only one measure per year. And in 2004, there was a new monitoring system that allowed the enforcement agency to have information on where deforestation was happening in a coarse resolution. It was not that good to measure deforestation, and with a size limit of areas greater than 25 hectares. Another difference between the DETER and PRODIS, the two monitoring system, is that DETER detected changes in forest cover in the early stages of deforestation. So when people start logging or changing the first impacts, the first disturbances in forest, DETER could already detect the changes. One characteristic of this monitoring system is that both are blind under forest cover. So whenever the region is covered by clouds, the system cannot detect any changes. And this detection system, this new detection system, allowed these enforcement agencies to start policing the region, creating operations, and in the ground reporting these infractions. That in the next step goes into the judgment systems, and then in the end the sanctions are eventually applied. So this is one IBAMA agent in the ground, the major environmental agency for the whole country. These are the kind of operations they ran. This is one of their cars. They're going on the ground and also with air support. And it really looks like a military operation because this work can be quite dangerous. And here they are destroying one machine that is being used to deforest, and that has been abandoned in the area as they saw they coming. So this is another example of how the monitoring system affect the whole enforcement process. These are two infraction reports that the one on the left is older and relied on drawings and coordinate points using GPS to create this report. And in the second, in the right-hand side, is one report that's already planned beforehand, and they have it on hand when they go to the field to run the policing activities. Another intervention that happened in this period after 2004 is the creation of protected areas. So the region is covered by 10 million of hectares of indigenous lands, 25 million of hectares of parks, and 35 million of hectares in total of protected areas. And this figure shows this video shows the land change over time in a region where there is a indigenous land in place. So this region, these especially protected areas have more strict rules, and you can no one can deforest at all. One last change that I'd like to highlight in this period is the creation of the Rural Properties Registry, which was created for most of the states in 2012, some prior than that. And that is a self-declared data where the farmers need to draw where their farms are and where they are going to conserve the forests, where they are going to produce. And so this gives the environmental agencies a tool to be able to responsabilize someone for the deforestation that they detect. So back to my diagram here on the institutional analysis that I tried to describe here. I'd like to highlight that in the Amazon there are two competing research units. The first is forest and the other is lands. Several actors value these different resources in different ways, and other actors are responsible for monitoring or enforcing the laws on the ground. Brazil before 2004, Brazil had already very strict forest rules. However, there was no ability to enforce those laws. And after this, and also to identify and charge the who is breaking the law. And 2004, there was this set of action situations where in the collective level was created a new monitoring system that allowed real-time detection of changes in forest cover. And there was an increased effort to enforce these laws with this new strategic set of informations. And then on the operational level, people might or not have changed their behavior, but weighting the risks of being caught and the level of the sanction, given their limited access to information and to process that information. And in the end, we observed a decrease in the deforestation rates, and that's what I propose to estimate using an econometric strategy to estimate the effect of deterrence. So the goal here is to estimate the causal effects of policing on deforestation. The biggest challenge here, and also the reason why there are not a lot of evidences in the literature, is how to address the two-way causality. At the same time, policing is likely to be avoiding deforestation. Also, policing is allocated in places where deforestation is higher. So finding empirical evidence on this can be challenging. And my question here is, what else affects policing? To use, I'd like to use an instrumental variables approach to overcome this problem. And I found two useful instruments, and I'm going to describe one of them for the sake of time, which is the cloud cover frequency. The data used on deforestation is the official data for the whole Amazon. The infraction reports are, or someone framed it as fines, are carried out by the two environmental agencies, IBAMA and ICMBio. ICMBio is an agency that takes care of protected areas. Cloud cover frequency based on remote sensing data, and the priority municipalities, which is the second instrument that I used. All this data set I created at the cell level. The cells represent 10 by 10 kilometers, and annually from 2004 to 2016. So this is how it looks like, the remote sensing data. It is, as you see, it's affected by clouds, and I counted how frequently a pixel is covered by cloud in a year. So that's my instrument. This is my model. I'm going very fast over it. In the first, I used two-stage least squares approach to estimate the instrumental variables, and the policing is my first outcome in the first stage, and I use my instruments, the police, the municipalities, and cloud covered to estimate policing. I use time and space fixed effects here, and also a set of controls. And in the second level, I estimate deforestation using these estimated policing, also using time and space fixed effects. So the results, first is that cloud cover reduce policing. So that means my instrument is valid. Cloud cover actually affects the ability to police the region. The priority municipalities, my second instrument, also increase policing, which is the follow the rationality of picking it. And the effect of interest here is the policing that have a deterrent effect on deforestation. And by increasing the number of infraction reports by 0.23, which means 1 standard deviation, this is a lot though. Maybe I should use another way to show the results, but that represents a 67% less deforestation. To summarize these results and the data, using the data that I have, I calculated the avoided deforestation, and the avoided deforestation was 4,500 of square kilometers per year on average, and a total of an area equivalent to the state of West Virginia have been avoided only in this period. And this represents a total amount of 72 teragrams of carbon per year. And this is 13% of the US emissions by transportation. Another side question that I tackled using this econometric model is that some authors raised the hypothesis that people are trying to avoid detection because of this limit of 25 hectares. And as we can see here, the detectable deforestation, so greater patches of deforestation, they decrease a lot over time, but the undetectable also decreases, but not that much. So the share of deforestation that is from undetectable deforestation increased over time in this period. And I estimated the effect of enforcing, of policing on these different groups of deforestation. And I found that the detectable deforestation decreased at a higher amount as compared to undetectable deforestation, but the undetectable deforestation also decreased. And this shows that this is directly related to the monitoring and policing activities. So in conclusion, this paper aimed to evaluate the impacts of monitoring and law enforcement on deforestation. And I showed that the presence of environmental agents has a deterrent effect on deforestation, and that policing is more effective to deter detectable deforestation than the undetectable one. And in the next steps, where I'm expanding this analysis, I'm trying to assemble a new data set at the property level to run further sensitivity, to raise other questions and run further sensitivity analysis, such as is deterrence different across property size, assuming that property size can capture some kind of variation in the actors, and what is the effect of private properties versus public areas, which are two different kinds of deforestation, one more related to appropriation of public areas, so land grabbing, and the other one, the expansion of production itself. And I'd like to wrap up my presentation with this picture showing the moment right after the IBAMA got to a place where deforestation was happening, and people saw they coming and left the tree standing, but with some scars. And that also captures the message here that law enforcement and monitoring and law enforcement are actually being effective in reducing deforestation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sacha. Round of applause. Very poignant and fitting conclusion there as well. Thank you. And yes, so the queue is open. So I'll be monitoring. Okay, so please do weigh in with a quick hand raise or chat there. I'm remembering back when I was teaching sustainability kind of law and policy a few years ago, Sacha, and back then this was like 2013, and I used this as one of those success stories, right? As you pointed to, there was a big dip because of the power of those reforms from 2004 by then. And as you point to, like, local empowerment and kind of policing seem to be part of the secret sauce there. And I'm wondering now, and in this current era, now looking back 5+ years later, right? Are there ways to get back, right, in terms of other policy reforms that could be tackled? We can't just reverse the clock to 2004, but given what's happened, right, over the intervening years, if you were put in charge, for example, of Amazon sustainability, what would you take are some of a few key policy takeaways about what's happened in terms of enforcement over the last 5 or so years, and then what we should look to going forward? That's probably a different part of your dissertation, so it's not completely fair based on your presentation right now, but I'm sure it's something you thought about, and I'd just love to hear your thoughts.
So you mean the changes that happened over the last few years?
Yeah, so how can we get back to the 2012 basically, but also even improve on that? Because even in 2012, right, there was still a fair amount of deforestation going on. So clearly verification and enforcement is a piece of that. It's tough because of cloud cover, et cetera, as you point to, but are there ways even to learn from other analogies, other cases you might be familiar with that could be applied to the Amazon to more effectively deal with this issue? Anyway, my mind naturally goes to policy implications for a lot of this stuff, so I just love to hear your thoughts on any of that.
So yeah, for those who are not following the current situation in Brazil, after 2015, there was a lot of political instability in Brazil, and in 2019, the new president took office, and he promised basically that he would relax all the environmental laws, and one of the major channels of this weakening is by reducing the industry of fines, as he referred to. And so what's happening now is that he is attacking the agencies responsible for monitoring and weakening changing all the people in charge for the environmental agencies. So this effort right now is basically not happening at all, and the opposite, because the discourse is also incentivizing people to deforest more and create a new interpretation of what is the right thing to do. So also the discourse is changing people's behavior, and really what can be done now to go back to that time, I don't know, because we have this president in charge, but I'm confident that people who used to do the job are still there in these agencies, just are not working as they like to. And the know-how of how to do it is they already have. And also that despite there was all this effectiveness in reducing deforestation, there are a lot of things that should be improved, and that I'm trying to identify with my research somehow. But they are secondary in the narrative of reducing deforestation right now, simply because it just changed the scale of things.
The politics is a lot more challenging than the policy. It's a great point, Sacha. And then Brian, please.
Good, thank you. It was nice paper, nicely done. And again, maybe asking about things that there's lots more in other chapters and so on. Also, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about some things I'm wrestling with. So apologies in advance if I'm projecting my issues on what you're saying. But part of it, you, in a sense, nicely say you can explain a quarter, 25% of what goes on. And in a sense, the questions are both about what's the other 3/4 and also what are the processes and mechanisms that may be going on within that 1/4, even if, or even where policing is part of the link. And I clearly accept, enforcement policing is an important part of dealing with issues. However, I mean, firstly, part of what the paper, clearly kind of says is, wait a minute, it's not as simple as just, okay, what's the risk of being fined because the numbers of people and the risks of being fined are so small. That's doesn't seem very good as an explanation of all of it, but other factors, deterrence, broader things are going on there. And this is where, okay, the SES, CIS framework is nice, but to me, it seems like it would be good then to either expand it, take it down to another level, or use something like what's used in theory of change models that gives some more detail of what the links are, including, again, the links that would be particularly relevant for policy. That includes a whole set of things, which again, to me, don't get enough attention of, okay, what are things that can make having forests stay in place more valuable? I could say more about that, but I'll try and keep it quick. The thing, and apologies if this comes a bit harsh, but again, it's part of what I'm wrestling with of, okay, too much attention to punishment and prisoner's dilemma. But basically, if you frame things in terms of policing, the risk is that what you're doing conduces to, creating a police state. It looks as if, the problem is lack of enforcement. The solution obviously must be better enforcement, as opposed to taking a broader view that says, wait a minute, what's going on in terms of the communities, the people's own decisions, things like legitimacy, the consent of the governed, things like Arun Agarwal, I like his stuff on environmentality. Getting communities involved starts to change how they see their world and what they value and so on. And that whole level, which from a rational choice point of view, in a sense, it's like magic. I mean, you can make changes that just don't emerge from a very narrow economistic kind of model. So those are more along the lines of comments, but we'd be happy to hear what comment responses you may have. Thanks.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that there are other. The strategy may not be taken for granted as the best strategy, just because we saw in our model an effect of reducing deforestation, and part of this other ramifications of this set of questions that I'm asking in my dissertation, I'm going to target using more qualitative research and case studies, and also to understand the mechanisms as you questioned. And I think that requires a level of data that this data set at the regional level cannot provide me. And also because there's a lot of variation and complexity in this problem that I cannot really, at least I don't know how to account for that in my econometric model. And yeah, I think overall that that's it, and thank you for your comments. I don't know if I answered all the questions.
Good, thanks.
We can circle back to Brian if we need to. Thanks a lot though. And it looks like I'm not sure if the order changed with the raised hands. On my screen, Jamie, Tanya, and Paolo were the next three. Is that what you guys think as well? Because
Yeah, I think Tanya was next, and
I
then
feel like
Paul,
Tanya
and
was
then
next,
me.
right? I don't
Yeah,
know why
I'll
it
go
changed in my
third.
mind. So if it's okay, Jamie, yeah, let's start with you, Tanya, then we'll go to you.
Yeah, if Jamie doesn't mind, just because mine is kind of, I guess, a follow-up to Brian's point. So like the point, or I guess what I wanted to say is kind of similar to what Brian was just talking about, is like there might be kind of something else going on here. And I know you mentioned it's like difficult to account for in kind of the way an econometrics model is set up. But one of the things that we think about a lot in international human rights is this idea of in terms of changing behavior over time, like to disincentivize bad human rights behavior, we talk about the power of persuasion versus the power of enforcement. So enforcement entails negative incentives, right? Which is what you're talking about, right? You get fined if you get caught. There are adverse effects to if you break the rules. Whereas positive enforcement is creating incentives. So we talk about this a lot in terms of preferential trade agreements and how that creates positive incentives for countries to engage in better human rights behavior because they get rewarded for it. So I'm wondering, like within the framework of what you're talking about, is there like a way that you can account for like the competing effects of maybe some sort of positive incentives that are being generated? Like, because I mean, that could also be having an effect. And actually, I kind of worry that maybe maybe that's causing the decrease in what you say is undetected, like deforestation or undetectable deforestation, because something else we look at a puzzle. I'm sorry, this just reminds me a lot of like kind of the framework of like some international human rights research, but a lot of what we look at as well is this rise in kind of undetectable torture methods. And we found that the positive incentives do a better job at discouraging that, and that the actual like enforcement and negative incentives have no effect at all, and even sometimes like increase instances of it. So like, I'm just kind of wondering if maybe like there's something there that's going on under the hood with like the power of persuasive methods that are also working in tandem here. I don't know if this really like relates very well. This just made me think of that literature.
Yeah, I think it relates perfectly well. And actually, it may not be that clear in my presentation, but this effect that I'm measuring actually packs these positive incentives as well. So, for example, there is this access to credit that you are not punished if you deforest, but you cannot access credit if you are in a negative list from IBAMA. So and this extends to other incentives that because IBAMA is the main environmental agency in the region. So all these policing efforts creates this accountability for deforestation, and it goes beyond the forest laws, but also these other programs that are in place all over the Amazon and that rely on this main environmental agency. The effect is packed in these estimates that I ran. And also from another perspective, completely different, with Professor Brondizio, I'm in a project where we are trying to understand more at mostly at the local level, doing field work that has been interrupted, of course, but trying to identify local initiatives that are in places where we would expect deforestation, but and we would model as high risk of deforestation, in regional models, but these areas are actually positive deviances, so that we don't observe deforestation. Forest is actually there. What kind of economic activities that are happening on the ground promoting these kind of things? What kind of social relations that promote this kind of outcome? So yeah, so this is another branch of my dissertation, and it's a bigger project. It's just I'm part of, but yeah, this is another way of analyzing these changes that happened recently.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's super interesting. And I get that, like, kind of some of these enforcement positive, negative incentives kind of go hand in hand. So it's probably like hard to disentangle that. But like, I think a lot about like, well, what is like more effective, and trying to like, try and disentangle that and parse that out. But yeah, but very, very cool.
And just to follow up, another interesting fact is that only 3% of the fines is collected by IBAMA. Even after the higher policing activities, all those fines that have been applied, they are not actually collected. So the enforcement process is not complete because the sanction is rarely applied, except for the sanctions of destroying equipment and so on. But so that made me think about that, and that there are other mechanisms that are probably underlying this effect that I observed.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Tanya. Yeah, we can follow up there again as well. And I'll note Brian's comment there about the theory of change model too. That could be fun to follow up on too, Sacha. I agree, carrots and sticks both, right? And maybe if we have time at the end, you could reflect on, even if this Biden administration planned to assemble this coalition around, 20 billion in incentives to basically pay, these communities to, keep the Amazon, to stop this deforestation, what impact that would have on the ground, right? How would you even get those funds where they would need to be? But for now, Jamie, I think, was next, and then Paolo. Yes. Okay, Jamie, please.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think it was Paolo, but
I'm so sorry, guys. I don't know what's going on with the order on the top here. Paolo, please.
Go first.
Okay. Ladies first. Ladies first, I think, Jamie.
No, Jamie was first. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so it has been a while since I've thought about the Amazon and deforestation, and so I'm gonna ask a really basic question: who is incentivized to deforest the Amazon? Is it local communities? I've heard that it's more like intellectual or not international investors. But to be honest, like I have no clue what the current status on that is, and I think. And I don't know, remember you mentioning that in your talk, and it seems like that would influence how we police or offer positive incentives. I don't know, who are these people who want to deforest the forest?
Yeah, I made this question myself, and that's the next step on the econometric analysis. I try to somehow categorize these changes, but I would not dare to explain who is deforesting the whole region, because it's so diverse and so huge. But the main direct drivers of this deforestation are large properties where they are producing cattle ranching, and also soybean productions. And yeah, and other than that, and I think that's more recently is more gaining more importance, this other kind of deforestation, which is the tentative to appropriate of public lands and make money out of the land market. So this will later be sold to these other actors that are producers, but it is just a strategy to appropriate from lands and get free land and then sell them. So and this is a process that I think with the narrative from the new president, Bolsonaro, I think that incentivizes a lot of this land grabbing process.
Does that answer your question, Jamie? Yeah. Okay. No. More to be explored, as you said, Sacha. So Paolo, without further ado, thanks for being patient there.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to see you all. I miss being in Bloomington and the opportunity to be in that room discussing this live. So Sacha, thanks. A brilliant presentation as always. Very beautiful slides and very clear explanations. And I want to touch on the point of that you already mentioned briefly, that relates to this to the erosion of environmental governance in Brazil, right? And specifically in terms of budgetary cuts that this environmental agents have suffered or experienced over the last years. And in that regard, when you showed one of your results about the avoided deforestation, it struck me that you showed a very strong effect in avoided deforestation in 2008, and then but most of the avoided deforestation was after that period in 2016, 15, 14, and I guess this budgetary cuts has been going on, and in particular, the corrosion of environmental governance in Brazil has started since, let's say, 2012, if you will, when the new forest code was approved. So it seemed a bit counterintuitive to me to see that, considering the corrosion of governance, the undergoing budgetary cuts, that avoided deforestation by policing was higher and more presented a better result in this following years. So I don't know if you have thought about that, if you have an explanation for that, and if you have data on budget for IBAMA, ICMBio, that could support also your explanations and your results.
Thanks, Paulo. So I agree that it's quite counterintuitive, but in this, what I did here to just illustrate the effect, instead of a single estimate of the marginal effect of policing on deforestation, I created that graph that just accounted for the amount of infraction reports that was reported each year. So, and this in this database, the infraction reports increase over time, especially if we account for the number of activity related to deforestation. So that's why it shows that there's a greater effect in the later periods, but it's just because there is more enforcement activity going on in that time. So basically, yeah, to illustrate this effect.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And I think Jess is next, and then Renata.
Yeah. So this was great and super fascinating, and a little bit close to my own heart, because I think I started grad school working on something similar to this in Central Africa Forestry Initiative project with Arun Agarwal. So it's really awesome to see this. And so I want to sort of build on something that both Paolo was talking about and also that Jamie was talking about, because I think they're related. So Paolo's question was, I think, about budgetary cuts, and which is really at its heart about sort of capacity of IBAMA, right? And what it can and can't do in terms of enforcement as a result of these budget cuts. Governments, with respect to their environmental agencies, not only have capacity constraints, but have strategic constraints, right? And so I think this is important because Jamie's point is really, really matters here, right? In that governments have incentives to enforce not only if they care about sort of like the global view of whether whether lots of deforestation is happening, but also because it brings them money, right? It brings them fees and fines, and those are costly to get, right? So we know that monitoring is costly. And so the question is I think that there's a major geographic component to this, which is that regions that are deforested by individual large actors, right, are maybe, and which are not very difficult to detect, are relatively easy to collect a fair amount of money from, potentially, although this may be an empirical question in Brazil. Whereas small local communities who are causing deforestation that are scattered, that's diffuse, that's a little bit more difficult, not only to monitor, but more importantly, more difficult to actually enforce and get to, right? More costly to monitor, and you're going to get less money in terms of fines from them because they can't really pay as well. And so at the end of the day, right, you have this really fascinating instrumental variable of clouds, which I think is very creative on your part as someone who got really bogged down in trying to do a seasonality and cloud cover of that sort of thing. So super creative, really applaud you on that. But I'm wondering if you have, or if you can, or if you want to think about the strategic component of policing vis-a-vis the sort of geographic cost of enforcement and the return on that enforcement for the environmental agencies that get to collect fees from this, right? So we have a little bit of a potentially a sort of like who is being monitored, that determines how much or how likely they are to actually pay a fine, and therefore what the benefit is of having engaged in that monitoring on the part of the state.
So thanks to the question. Yeah, I've been thinking about that, and that's one of the motivations that I'd like to look closer to the private properties and try to categorize them somehow and understand how that group respond to the policy. And in the environmental legislation in Brazil, the fines are proportional to the how much people can afford. So this is something that it also contributes to your hypothesis that you can raise more money out of finding people who are large holders and that make a lot of profit out of that deforestation. And yeah, I didn't evaluate that, but I think that's really interesting, and that may be one of the mechanisms why there are differences in the response from different actors. Also in that line, something that I really think is that it's not actually the increased enforcement activity that led to reduced deforestation rates, but a better allocation of the resources they had. So because the resources didn't change that much over time, the information they had to go to the right places changed drastically. And so I think this is, in terms of strategy of IBAMA's strategy, this is really interesting, both to try to shape somehow their strategy with something that I may come up with in my research, but also to understand how they are thinking and how they are allocating their very limited resources, even after the 2004. And so I did had a conversation with one of the chiefs in IBAMA in my doing field work, and at that time I was with the wrong idea, and he changed my mind on it. I was thinking about the allocation of resources where it was closer to roads and where they could access easier. And they said that, no, that's not how we plan the things. We plan operations and we allocate the resource to stop deforestation in different places. And it's a huge operation. We go using helicopters and we allocate people from the south and southeast of Brazil to go there, so they don't have conflicts with people who live there. So that and yeah, I was thinking another way, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense to think whether they prioritize where they can make more money and they can avoid more deforestation, because yeah, they actually have a choice to make, right? They have a choice on whether profiting more or less, while others might only be subsisting and the.
Yeah. And I just think you should see this as a potential for a cool contribution if you haven't already finished everything already. Well done.
We never finish everything, right, Jess? That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm just taking an eye on the clock here. We have a couple minutes left. Sasha, if you're able to hang out even after we're wrapped up for a few minutes, we've been doing that with the colloque series, right? So we can kind of continue the conversation. If you have to jump off, no worries. But I just wanted to give you that opportunity too.
No, I can stay, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, just as a heads up. So if we don't have full freight for the next 3 minutes, we can continue on then. But let's at least make sure to get to Renata now, and then if we have a minute, we can transition to Gustavo. So please, Renata.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. Congratulations, Sacha. Parabéns for the great presentation. Very interesting. I just wanted to hear from you because especially concerning the registry, the forest code reform, and also the registry as an instrument, because many others have also mentioned here about positive incentives. And I did my master thesis on the implementation of the CAR in Brazil, but it was on Rio de Janeiro, so on the Atlantic forest area. And I remember that when I was talking to stakeholders in the regions and farmers, people mentioning that the fact that now farmers had the opportunity to themselves to assign or to recognize what is the size of the plots and so on, ended up giving them a kind of a position as a steward towards environmental protection, because now they would have more information about their land. And I was just wondering whether, because you mentioned different policies, and I wanted to hear if you have heard about any. I remember that there was a lot of expectation on the CAR, on the registry, on the implementation of the registry. And I just wanted to hear whether within your research you also specifically looked at this policy, and whether the instruments from this policy had maybe any influence on the deforestation rates on the Amazon.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Renata. But I haven't looked at closer to the card data and what were the effects of the new registry in the Brazilian Amazon. I'm planning to use as the unit of analysis part of, and a combination of the CAR data set with other official data sets on property boundaries. But I haven't looked closer in this particular policy.
Thanks so much, Sacha and Renata. We are out of time officially. So how about we do this? Okay, let's thank Sacha again, because this has been fantastic. And we look forward to continuing to follow this with great interest, of course. And then Gustavo, let's turn to you next, okay? And for anybody who needs to drop off, please do so. Enjoy the beautiful afternoon for those around Bloomington, and hopefully where you are as well. And look forward to the colloque next Monday in the meantime. But for now, let's stay on and continue this for those who can with Gustavo.